multiply fractions in percent. We're going to have to divide by fractions in percent. We won't have to add them or subtract them. And the same with decimals. So if you're having any difficulty adding or subtracting either fractions or decimals, you need to continue to practice, because if you understand the rules, if you understand how to do it, and you all should have the steps written down, if you follow those steps over and over again, the more problems you do and follow those steps every time, what makes it stick is the repetition. Things that you are not born knowing, it is repetition that makes it part of you. You know, you're not born knowing your ABCs. That's why you sing them and say them, and parents start teaching them very young, because those are things that you have to just repeat over and over again in order to make them part of what you know. And so it's the same thing with math. You can learn how to do fractions, and as soon as you can do them, you understand how to do them. Then it's the practice of them that makes you do them right every time you do them. You know, and then even with that, you know, I've said before, there are no absolutes. Even when you know how to do them very well, you're going to still make mistakes sometimes, just because you're human. You may add 5 and 2 and get 6 instead of 7. You know, even though you know full well it's 7, so you're going to still make mistakes. But you want to make sure that you have the process down pat, that every time you see a fraction problem that's adding fractions, you fall into those steps and get your answer. As soon as you see that it's subtraction, or if it's decimals, or if it's division of anything, you need to be able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide any whole number you see, any fraction you see, any decimal that you see. So right now, if that's not like this for you, then that's what you need to be practicing every single day. Every single day. Do 50 problems. Do 100 problems. The more you do it, the more it's ingrained. That was the theory behind having kids write across the board, "I will not talk in class," 100 times. But they figure by the time you write it that many times, it becomes a part of you. It takes that much repetition to change behavior. So you need to work on that. Okay? Percent. I was home yesterday and I was watching Jeopardy, because I like to watch it and challenge myself and see what I do know and what I don't know. And there was a question, and it was in another language, and I'm not even sure the category. The category may have even been something like authors or literature or something. It wasn't anything about numbers. But in the phrase, it had sent something, and the category, they had to tell the number that it had to do with, and these were 3 actually teachers. They were having a teacher, you know, sometimes they have different occupations on Jeopardy, but anyway, these teachers, they were in the, I don't know if it was the final round, but anyway, they were smart people. But they had this, and it was a long thing, but this was part of it, and they asked what number, and someone guessed 20 and someone else guessed 10, and the answer was what? 100. And none of the 3 got that answer correct. And I said, well, wait, no, it's got to be 100. And well, I thought, but you know, they were smart and they didn't answer that. And then I said, well, I just said to myself 100, and then the answer, when they didn't answer, was 100 something. And so cent means 100 in all kinds of languages. It means 100. Our cent is a penny. It's 100th. It takes 100 of them to make one. Century, 100, you know, we've talked about that before. Percent then means per 100. Per 100. It's out of 100 is what it means. When you say percent, you mean out of 100. 100 is the whole. And we've talked about with fractions, percent is a part of a whole as well. It's not a whole. It's a part of a whole, just like a fraction and a decimal. The difference, you remember, in regular fractions, the denominator could be anything. We talked about you can cut a hole into sevenths. into thirteenths, into fifteenths, into fourths. With the decimal fraction, it had to be in a power of 10. You could have tenths, and hundredths, and thousandths, and 10,000ths, and 100,000ths. You can cut them into a lot of different pieces as long as those pieces, the whole, was a power of 10. Now with percent, the only denominator is always 100. So when you say he got 70% on his test, you actually mean that he got 70 out of 100. That's what 70% means. It means it's out of 100. So if you're asked to write 70% as a fraction, it is 70 out of 100. But with every fraction, what do you have to do? Reduce it. So you couldn't leave it 70 over 100 as a fraction. You'd have to reduce it, and that would reduce to what? 7/10. 10 will go into 70 7 times and into 100 10 times. That's as low as you can go. As a decimal, 70% is 70 hundredths. How do you write 70 hundredths as a decimal? How many places are in hundredths? 2. How many numbers are in 70?
2.
So all you need to do is just write it. 70 hundredths. Remember, if it was 7 hundredths, there's still 2 numbers in hundredths, right? But there's only 1 number in 7. So that's why you have to, and the 7 has to end up on the hundredths, so you'd have to put the 0 there. Has to be hundredths for percent. So to change it from a percent to a decimal, all you have to do is divide by 100 is what you're doing. And to divide by 100, you do that by moving the decimal point back 2 places. It's very important that you understand that when you move that decimal point back and forth in a number, you are multiplying and dividing that number by a power of 10. If I had this number and I wanted to multiply it by 10, I could do that simply by moving this decimal point over 1 time. 2.8 times 10 is 28. If I wanted to multiply this number by 100, I'd move it 2 places to the right. 1, 2. It would equal 280. Because if I actually multiply 2.8 times 100, one decimal point, you see you get your 280. But that's a shortcut. And the folks who are making the new GED test say that's one thing that we need to make sure that testers know, is how to multiply and divide by a power of 10 by just moving that decimal point, because it saves so much time. And especially when you deal with percent. Because with percent, because it's always out of 100, you're always going to either be multiplying or dividing by 100. When you multiply, the number gets larger, so we move the decimal point to the right. And you move it to the right the same number of times as there are zeros in the power of 10. So if I want to multiply a number by 10, there's 1 0 in 10, I move it 1 place. If I want to multiply it by 100, there are 2 zeros in 100, I move it 2 places. If I want to multiply it by 1,000, 3 zeros, 3 places, and so forth. By the same token, if I want to divide by those powers of 10, I move it the same number of times, but I move it to the left. Because numbers get smaller to the left. Because to the left, I'm changing $2.80 to 28 cents when I divide it by 10. Move it back 1 time. If I wanted to divide this number by 1,000, I'd move it 1, 2, 3 times. So this number divided by 1,000 would equal 0.0028, or 28/10,000. So to multiply by a power of 10, we're going to move to the right, and we're going to move it as many times as there are zeros in the power. To divide by a power of 10, we're going to move it to the left, and we're going to move it as many times as there are zeros in the power. Okay? Now, I saw some people writing it down, and I saw some people listening. I hope those of you who are listening, that's your preferred mode of learning, and that you can remember it just that way. Typically, the more senses that you put to learning something, the better you'll learn it. So you hear it, you see it, you do it. That's 3 different senses that you're putting to it, and you have a better opportunity to remember it. I want you to divide that number by 10. What is the answer? Huh? Divided by 10. Huh? 3.2. You get it? Every whole number has a decimal there. If I want to divide it by 10,